Good morning. This is Carl Dakin, and this is the Successful Funding Show. For those of you new to the show, this is a weekly program that I host on behalf of my consulting company, Dakin Capital. It is intended to share information that I've gained over 4.5 decades of work with startups, entrepreneurs, charitable organizations, government programs, and other people seeking to raise funding, however necessary, in whatever form, to advance their projects. Most of my work has been surrounding new innovation, doing things different under the sun that don't fit into common funding structures, or which are challenged by having to compete with things that are better understood, better defined, but not necessarily better. With that today, I do not have a guest, so it's just me and you, the audience. You're welcome on LinkedIn or YouTube to provide comments, questions, and so forth for today's program. Welcome everyone to participate at that level. And this is the third in a series of shows where I'm talking about fact checking. And to give you a little bit of background on that, most of my work over the last few years has been focused on entrepreneurs, new opportunities, trying to figure out how to position them so that they can match up or pair up with a investment source, funding source, or other source of resources that helps them move their project forward. And this year, over the last several months, I've been working to develop better systems, better communications with a number of funding sources so that I can help them pair up, match up with these opportunities. And so this work is ongoing and at several levels, both in trying to better understand how to qualify, classify people who are truly ready to put their money to work, who have a defined goal or mission of what they want to do with their money, and have some metrics on how high, how far these projects have to go or jump in order to gain that funding. All of this is leading to a current project to define the specifications for a new artificial intelligence supported platform that will facilitate matchmaking, the pairing of opportunities with different partners. And in this work, it is assumed that when the opportunity is presented, that it's not ready for funding. It does not have all the information needed for the person with the resources, a partner, to engage with or provide financing to the project, and that there will be a number of people like myself who serve as intermediaries to make the project ready for funding, make it fundable, and all the work that may go into that. So in doing this, I've been working on what a lot of people call due diligence. This is a review of an opportunity by someone with resources to determine what the project is, how it may perform in the future, what's real and what's not real, what's known and what's projected, so that they can make a decision and get into or walk away from the opportunity. And in doing this, what I've found is that a lot of entrepreneurs commonly know a lot, it's in their head, but they do not necessarily have that in a format or a style or data that's understandable, that can be communicated to the people with the resources. And as a result, what happens is you have an entrepreneur over here talking to a funding source over here, and they're not communicating because one's talking at this level about technology and things that may or may not be important to the person over here with the funding source, and they remain apart. They do not come together as a partnership, and nothing happens. And then when we start breaking this down into a more granular form, 2 weeks ago, we talked about looking at the facts behind the management team, who they are, what their capabilities are, their credentials, their trustworthiness, all of these different factors that are one of the first things that an investor or a funding source is going to look at. And then last week, we talked about the organization. How was this business or charity or community project organized, wrapped around the opportunity to be an ecosystem to carry this forward to a point where the benefits of the opportunity can be realized? This week, we're going to talk about innovation and technology. These are the things that make up the product or service that is being offered by the opportunity, the enterprise, in order for a customer to realize the benefits of it. And I do a lot of work, as I mentioned, over my last 4.5 decades of working with high-tech, innovative startups where they are creating something new under the sun. And as a result, it may do things that people don't know. It may do things that people don't know how to measure. There may be no standards or protocols for how to value the performance of this or how it works or its efficiency. And this creates more risk, more concerns on behalf of the funding sources. Even if they want the outcome, they need to know, they need to fact check as best they can. What is this innovation? How does it work? How would you quantify this? And knowing that what you may see is working in a experimental lab setting that may not work in the field, in the real world, meaning that it may have great results in small scale, one-off, but won't work in large scale or continuous or other types of presentations of this to the marketplace. And as a result, it's interesting. It's going to require more development, but it's not necessarily ready for prime time funding, and therefore the funding will not become available. And so today I'm going to get into how can you test, verify an innovation in order to provide information that's needed by a funding source and help them get to a point of comfort that this project, despite its early stage, despite the fact it's not fully baked, still represents a viable opportunity for funding. And if we can get to that point, if we can get a peace of mind by the person with the resources, how are we going to do that? Now, what I've been working on throughout this year is a stepped progression of activities that move from we don't know to we know everything there is to know, which may or may not still be adequate for purposes of making a decision. But it is intended to allow a funding source to kind of dip their toe in the water with a relatively small amount of money, but nonetheless an investment, and then to step that up with larger and larger amounts of money that get into planning and implementation of a plan that may realize the true potential of an innovation in its total form. So in this first stage, we call it due diligence or assessment. And the idea here is to step outside of the zone of the entrepreneur, of the small business leadership team with the enterprise who's moving this opportunity forward, and ask ourselves, what other information is available that is not necessarily biased or prejudiced in favor of the entrepreneur, which will verify all the claims, all the vision that they think that this particular innovation may have. And to do this in a fashion where we're gathering often endorsements, testimonials, certifications, other things which indicate that this will work as it is hoped to work. And I draw the distinction between knowing what a innovation will do and the vision, which may be way beyond that point, where the inventor, the entrepreneur, this small business group may see something that they think is so doable, so absolute that they could, they see it in their mind, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's real yet or ever. And the person with the funding sources is not convinced that this is something that makes sense for them to do. So lots of examples. I'm working with multiple projects today that range from new film products to technology for removing precious metals or rare earth elements from waste, industrial waste. We're looking at housing projects. We're looking at smart cities where we've integrated all kinds of things in terms of technology and infrastructure. And I'm looking at the potential for also integrating ownership, so that instead of a tenant in a building being isolated from the community in which they live with no true ownership in the community, moving to a situation where residents within a community are stockholders. They have the potential to both tell the ownership structure of which they're a part that they're unhappy or it needs to be improved, or give them some feedback, while participating in profits that may be earned from that. When we get into that, we will do that. But now I have a person in the audience who stepped forward, and I will throw his question up onto the screen. It says, hello, Carl Dakin. This is Mbulu from Ethiopia. I understand you point of reflections about successful funding. For the next, how we get funding agencies, which they work innovation and technology startup funders. So, Mbulu, this is a big question that could take days to answer correctly, but let's just break it down to the basics. When you're talking to a funding source, they have three first primary things that you have to be able to show and tell. One is that there has to be a relationship between you and the funding source where there exists trust. There is a conviction that this teaming together is going to get something accomplished that's positive and beneficial to both sides. So we talk about integrity, we talk about relationships. It doesn't happen out of the blue. And quite often there is a lead time or amount of time that has to lapse between an introduction to a funding source and an engagement back and forth that may take days, weeks, and months before there is this level of trust that would support the investment decision. The second thing is that the group has to have funding, which means that they can write a check or they can provide some alternative asset. It doesn't always have to be money. They could loan you employees. They might allow you to use a facility. They might have equipment that you can share. They may make introductions. All these things that if you had a grocery list and you were going down to buy all the things you needed for a successful enterprise that would cost you cash, there's a possibility you can get those directly from the funding source and reduce the amount of money you need to raise. But they have to have something of value. The third part, and in this case, the most important part, is what is the motivation? That's the reason why these words are behind me. What is the motivation for the person with the funding, with the resources to give it to you? They have their own goal, their own agenda, their own metrics on what they want to accomplish with their money. And the question is do you match up? Do you satisfy this? If you're going to bake a cake and you need flour and sugar, and the question then is, if you don't have the flour and sugar, you can't bake the cake. Well, the person who wants to bake the cake is hoping you are that ingredient. You are that one thing that they need in order to move their mission forward. This is not about you. You're not the center of the attention. You're not the center of the universe. You are simply one element that's going to help the person with the resources to achieve their mission. And are you that person? Too often, you'll walk into a presentation, an entrepreneur will say, hey, look at me, I have something cool. But the person they're talking to has funding. They trust the person who's asking for the funding, but there's no common alignment of interest. This one's trying to work on housing, and this one's trying to work on some issue dealing with disease curing or prevention. You're not going to have the funding source change their entire nature, composition of who they are, what they're investing in, to walk across into a completely different type of thing. And these are broad sweeping generalizations, but they can get very specific. So as an example, I'm working on a project for workforce housing. Workforce housing in this particular community means that a person who's a low income worker, maybe a single individual, maybe minimum wage as it's defined within this community within the United States, needs a roof over their head. And preferably, it would be something that would cause them to be a stable contributor to their community. There would be wealth building opportunities within putting a roof over their head. And it would be a quality roof. It wouldn't just be something else. And this is different from what's called affordable housing, subsidized for people who need government support or charitable support. It's different from somebody who's making a lot of money, who would be considered high-end housing. And yet at the same time, there's dozens and dozens of organizations, groups, and programs out there who can't agree on what represents workforce housing, the missing middle. They can't agree on how to get there from here. And so this contributes to this problem being unresolved. But if you're going to zero in and you're looking for funding for your program, you have to ask yourself, what problem are you solving? And then ask yourself, who else wants to solve this problem? How are you going to contribute to what they want to do? And based upon who you are, what you're doing, the products and services that you offer, there may be someone out there, there probably is someone out there who says, wow, I could use your help to get me where I want to go. And as a result, then now we have the framework for motivation, for working together to accomplish something that could not be accomplished separately. And then we have to work out whether or not this has an economic footing or charitable footing. However it's done, there's a rationale for how to work together that gets both sides to benefit from this new relationship. So when you're talking to funding agencies, right now, a lot of agencies around the world are in standby mode because a lot of funding from the United States has been cut or stopped or deferred, and they can't move forward with funding from that source, which is causing a number of groups to have to look around and look for new sources of funding, which may be an alignment with the private sector, with businesses. It may be providing a new product or service that addresses the market differently. It may be something else, but there's a lot of innovation that's going to be required now to, one, address problems that did not go away despite the cut of funding, and the agencies who are actually working with this. So there's a lot of charities that have one mode of working with someone. They're dependent upon either agency funding or charitable donations or some combination of that. And if that funding is cut off, then there's a need to make a change of direction of strategy called a pivot and to work back towards that. So, at this high level, Embelu, trying to answer your question is first, figure out who you are, what value you can bring, what problem you can solve, and maybe solve better in a superior fashion to someone else. Find out who has that problem, who needs you to do your work in order to advance their mission. And at that point, we have at least a minimum grounds for collaboration, which may lead to funding. So on today's topic, there may be some overlap between the question that Abalu asked and the topic of how do you verify a technology? So quite commonly, I will have someone who comes to me and they'll go, Carl, I've got this great invention. It does wonderful things. It's worth $1 gazillion, and I want somebody to give me some money. And at this point, we're gonna focus on just the technology. We're not going to talk about what we talked about 2 weeks ago, which is whether the inventor or the holder of this innovation is capable, qualified, competent to bring this technology to market. We're going to just talk about the technology. So in that regard, does it work? This seems like a simple question, which unfortunately is not. If they have, say, a device for purification of water, which is one area of strong interest to me because it will make a difference in handling industrial waste. It will make a difference in a turnkey 360 smart city design. There are multiple applications for new and better water purification technology, and I'm in the hunt for those to improve or advance some of the projects I'm working with. But when they say, will it clean, then we have to define clean water or purified water. Are we talking about drinkable water, water that I can pick up like this cup of coffee and have a sip? How is that defined? Well, there are all kinds of different standards for water from different government agencies, from the Environmental Protection Agency to different water districts at a local level, and they will tell you what represents clean water. Usually this means that there's nothing in it of an organic nature that may cause a disease. There's nothing of it of a non-organic nature that may be toxic to you. It's something that you consume that would not put your health at risk. And there are definitive standards on what those are, how to measure the water to determine if it is clean or not clean according to the standard. And so the first question when somebody says it will purify water, I ask them, what standard are you testing to? Is it a known recognized standard or is it a different standard? What kind of testing has been done, which is to take the water and examine it to determine what is left over or what remains in the water as a residual after the cleaning. And then I ask who did the testing. So I worked with inventors who will say, well, I did all the testing myself. I did it in my own laboratory, and that result may be perfectly accurate, but it's not necessarily as solid and from a standpoint of an investor looking at this, because they're going, well, who are you? Are you a competent technologist who can work in a lab, and do you have the right equipment? Is it the same standard or testing process used by those people who have to sign off on this or not? And so as what commonly happens is that you find another business who is recognized and respected. You would send the water sample over to them and you say, hey, is this going to meet the purity standards, the cleanliness standards that are set by A, B, or C, different regulatory agencies? And they will give you back a report that is on their letterhead with their data, which explains how the data was captured, what kind of tests were conducted. There might be multiple tests from different directions to kind of triangulate or verify that this information is correct. Now, this is important from a funding standpoint, from a due diligence standpoint, because it's no longer the word of the inventor entrepreneur, of the small business or whoever. It's the word of a third party. And this third party has been engaged. They have their own reputation. So it's not only the data that's on the page, it says, yes, it met this standard, but also it's the reputation of that particular agency or business that did the testing. And some people, you may find a small business who can do all the testing for you, but nobody knows them. You could send this to a federal laboratory where they may do the same test, identical to what the small business would do, but their credibility is higher. You may find that to convince a funding source of what you want to do, you may have to have it tested by multiple groups. And then we get back to the question, well, did the technology cause this to happen, or did you pull a glass of water out of the faucet and send it to the laboratory to see what they would tell you? And this sounds a little weird, but I've seen people do exactly that kind of a thing, where they're going, well, I have to get certified by this agency. My stuff won't get there, but I know it will sooner or later. So I'm just going to send some tap water in and get my certification, which is engagement in fraud. But from the mindset of the entrepreneur is a difference between reality and vision or hopefulness. And we have to stick to reality. So looking at this technology, or then the question is, well, what water did you purify? Did you take tap water and make it cleaner? Did you take frack water from oil and gas drilling and make it cleaner? Did you take sewage out of a municipal sewage plant and make it cleaner? What was the source of the original water? Because this now aligns, or doesn't align, with the interest of the funding source. Because if the funding source is going, I'm not doing frack water, I don't care about that, it's simply a matter of saying that my water is so dirty you can't fix it. You can't clean it up. Is it salt water from the ocean? Is it fracking water? Is it gray water, black water? There's several different types of water. Is it contaminated with radioactive material? There are things out there that are massive challenges to water purification. And the question is, what was before and what was after? So it's not only a testing of the outcome of what the water was after it's purified, you also have to have a test of the water before it was purified. So they know what was removed, what challenge was accomplished by taking all this stuff out of the water. So we know that whatever application we're talking about, we have data that matches that specific application. And so take a moment here and think about this. I'm going to take another comment from Usman, who's in the audience, who's watches this show and comments frequently on my newsletter that I publish on LinkedIn called Instant Funding. And all of you are invited to go to LinkedIn under my name, Carl Dakin. And I try to put out a newsletter as often as possible. This is now coming out 2, 3, 4 times a week with a weekly version as well. If you only have one time a week to read everything that I put out there, sign up or subscribe to the weekly version, or you can subscribe to the daily version. So Usman, thanks for being with us this morning. So going back to the application, you've taken frack water, you've cleaned it up, you've purified it, and you're thinking, I'm done, I have all the data I need. But if the funding source is not an oil and gas company, if they're not involved in development of natural resources as a fuel source, they may not care about the fracking water. They may say, well, that's not my problem, it's not my concern. I've got salt water, or I have briny water from a water well, and can you clean that up? And the inventor entrepreneur is thinking, well, it's the same process. We would do exactly the same thing we did for the frac water. We would come up with exactly the same outcome as with the frac water. But the person who's asking the question doesn't know that. There is no ability of theirs to extrapolate from one application to the next. They may see it over there and it may give them hope that what you have in this particular innovation is going to be good enough to help them in their situation, but they don't know that, and they need to know that. So this presents a problem if an innovation has many different potential applications, because the cost to set up and demonstrate each of the individual applications may cost a fortune all by itself. And if you're out creating demonstrations for people who will never invest, then that money, however useful in collecting data on the innovation, is not moving the needle in terms of getting funding. It's like playing a game of Battleship where every shot is called out and it doesn't hit anything. And entrepreneurs at the front end of innovation are pretty much investing their own money, their own time to bring their technology or innovation to market. And they don't have an unlimited source of funding or time to do that. And I've worked with a large number of inventors, entrepreneurs, new businesses, where they picked a particular application for a broad scale innovation, and it was the wrong one, and they were out of money. And then they save up money and they try to go out after another application, and it's the wrong one. And then at some point they get tired, they get frustrated, they step back from the business because they're out of funding, and their mindset is in the wrong place to go forward. And so as you're thinking about the innovation, and I talked about pairing with the goal of the funding source, you want to make sure you understand what is the goal of someone you're going to talk to. And if it's not something that you have information immediately available, then the question is, would this funding source pay for the demonstration? Would they pay for proof of the validity of the technology, of its technical efficacy, that it will do what you think it will do? If they won't, then you have a gap, and that may be a small gap, but still insurmountable, in that the funding source says, I need it for this particular application, and I need the information to be about this application, not about something else. So as you're looking for proof, first things first, think about what you have to prove. What is it that is going to match up, pair up with the potential investor? Because that becomes kind of the goal or outcome you're seeking as you're fact checking your own technology in order to show it to this funding source. And then you have to make sure that the funding source knows how high the bar is in terms of what they want to prove. I've talked to investor candidates who says, well, I'm looking for clean water. And I would ask them, what standard are you using? And they don't know. They're going, well, it's something that's drinkable. And you're like, okay, well, that helps, because if I use this standard from this agency, that's considered to be a drinkable or potable water threshold. If we get it to that level, will you fund it? And you're trying to pin the funding source down who doesn't really have a hard outcome or goal set for when they make a decision. They are a little loose, a little vague, because they don't fully understand all these different nuances, all the different elements that are there in what is clean water, because it has several different definitions from very many different places. And again, your solution has to fit very precisely into that specific application that the funding source cares about. If you're off just even a small amount in a different application, a different amount in the performance, the manner in which the testing was done, you still may fail to be able to tell your story to that person. So when we talk about verifying the technology, we're trying to make sure that we have a defined outcome that meets the funding sources requirements. We're talking about using outside groups in order to do the testing, validation, verification, which they can put into a document that you can show and tell to the funding source, so that they go, okay, you took water from this group, this source, which is well water in a rural area that is heavy in salts, heavy in some metals that are not considered acceptable from a clean water standpoint. We have the test results on that. We know exactly where it started, and that looks exactly or nearly exactly like the problem that the funding source is trying to solve. And then the water was cleaned, going through a series of steps, doing different equipment, doing different things. And this led to the understanding that a new result, again with a third-party test, is giving me the kind of result that matches up specifically with this funding source's needs. And therefore, it appears that this technology does what it wants to do, but we may add more criteria or more demands upon this demonstration. How much water was cleaned? Was it a cup of water, which is not enough to give a person water for a day? Are we talking about 1,000 gallons of water a day, enough water for a single household, a group of households, a municipal situation, or an industrial application? We need to know the volume of processing, because one of the other common failures in these stories is they go, look, I cleaned this water to this water, but it was only a cup. It was a cup of water, and that's not enough to know, will this work in volume? Will the technology, the innovation work at scale that, again, matches the needs of the person with the funding source? So obviously, if a homeowner came to you and said, I'm using so much water a day for drinking water, washing clothes, whatever we're doing with water in a household, that's going to be at one level. If we're talking to a business, a higher level. If we were talking to a municipality, an even higher level. And does this technology innovation continue to work as we increase the size and scale of its application? And does that match the funding source? And this is where we may say, well, we're doing a great job of cleaning up the water for a single household, but our monetary requirements, the funding we're looking for, is up here compared to the benefit of a single homeowner. In which case, from a pairing standpoint, we have to move from a single homeowner to maybe an HOA, maybe a developer, or a municipality, where we're at a size and scale that the size of the investment is matched by a positive outcome from utilization of the technology. So keep in mind that it really requires pinpoint accuracy in pairing the innovation to the needs of the potential funding source. You have to define what that outcome is, and to the extent that there are third-party standards, government standards, private standards, or whatever, then this allows you to say we meet or exceed the standards set by such and such an organization. You'll have instances, it's not uncommon with an innovation, where there are no standards. You're saying, well, I can do something that wasn't done before, and there's no current agreed upon way of measuring this. we've kind of encountered this issue with the definition of smart cities, where in the United States, smart cities is essentially digital connectedness of one activity using data to another activity using data. And they now can potentially talk to each other, which could improve effectiveness, efficiency, or some other outcome. But when we talk to people outside the United States, they're going, well, no, digital connectedness is not enough. A smart city is actually more properly defined as a future city, where we've got everything that's happening within the city, economic development, community, social interaction, moving businesses forward. All these are connected so that we're working with an entire ecosystem and not some small fraction of that. And because we don't have a common definition, every time we start a conversation with a funding source who says, well, I'm interested in smart cities, we then have to ask a whole bunch of questions. Well, how do you define a smart city? What outcome would make this fundable project for you? How do you define that, or who's defining that, or what combination of standards has to be met? And there's a due diligence by the person seeking funding of the funding source to try to get to that outcome that will trigger the investment or the funding. And it's very important that this is done very early in the conversation, because otherwise this conversation may meander and wander for a long period of time before the person with the funding source, that's not what I'm looking for. And you're going, I've spent all this time and energy talking to you. I spent all this money on testing, third-party labs. I've done all these different things to prove to you that this works. And now you tell me that that isn't what you meant. And the burden at that point is on whoever's seeking the funding to square up, tie down, lock down, whatever term you want to use, that if you can show that the technology does a specific thing, an outcome, that they will fund that. And if they won't commit to an outcome, then you have a moving target, probably an impossible target to touch or pursue, and matching may never occur. And that's really a terrible strategy for a capital campaign, is to chase someone who may or may not ever write a check. You really don't have the time or energy or whatever to go down that path. So as we're again looking at innovations, we want to know how well things work. And sometimes this is a technical specification easily measured, like the one I mentioned for potable, drinkable water. I can get you a dozen different definitions that are probably acceptable to a variety of funding sources. It says if you can take water from here, whatever the source is, to over here in this application, we're good. We'll get some funding in here. Sometimes, though, we get into whether or not this is an element of marketability or customer satisfaction. Meaning that if I create something with a new flavor, is it tasteful? Is it entertaining? Is it going to cause somebody to buy something? Which is based upon the subjective evaluation of the customer. And that's not the topic we're going to get in today. That's going to be the topic for next week, when we get into asking ourselves, okay, we have something that has an outcome, but it really is the outcomes that we know about have to be tested in a real world application with feedback from the ultimate customer, where they can thumbs up or thumbs down whether or not this is meeting their needs, whether it's meeting their needs so well that they would choose that product or service over all the other things that they can choose from, and get to a result. So if you're telling me that you're going to bring out a new energy drink against the hundreds of energy drinks that are already out there, it isn't that the energy drink doesn't provide energy. It isn't that it doesn't have the right chemical compositions. It isn't safe. All those things are over here on the technical side. We still have market acceptance questions to be answered. And that is a different form of fact checking, which we'll get into next week. On today's topic, as we're looking at this, we're saying you have something new if it is something that is working towards an existing established standard, and we have third-party verification of that, and we have verification from the funding source that if it achieves that outcome, that this is fundable, then we're in the zone. And then if we have something new under the sun that does not have an existing standard, which may not have well quantified outcomes in terms of performance, then we're going to have to create our own standard. We're going to have to say this will do the following things. And people look at it and they go, okay, and we may have to explain the benefits because it may not be obvious. There's nothing more frustrating than talking to someone who says, oh, I've got a new gadget and it has the following 8,300 components and they're manufactured in all these things that the investor doesn't care about. None of those are things that they're measuring that support the investment decision. They're looking at the performance of the device, the outcome, the benefit. They'd like to know that everything inside the black box works. They'd like to know that it works with consistency to over a term of time, duration, all kinds of other pieces of information. But they're primarily looking at what does this thing do, not how it does it. And I've got several slide decks on my desk right now, which are 95% about how the thing works, with little or no information on what does it do, how do I measure the outcome. And this is very important to investors who are looking for kind of like 3 layers of information. One is, does it perform? What's called the efficacy, the quality of performance, the efficiency of performance. They will also look at the economics, which is yet another topic of fact checking for another show, which is, can I make this for this price and sell it for a higher price, leaving me with a delta, which is my profit margin, which will allow me to start and grow the business and give up a portion of those profits to the investment sources, the funding sources, so that they get a return on their investment. And to the extent that this delta may not be everything that a return on investment or classical investor is looking for, is there an impact? Is there a social cause, an outcome that would cause an impact investor who will substitute their need for return on investment with some kind of social outcome that is something they care enough about that they're willing to give up the opportunity to invest in other opportunities that will generate a higher rate of return in order to get an outcome that achieves some kind of a social outcome. We're going to be looking at those types of standards in a couple weeks as we go from today's technology innovation. We're going to market acceptance or customer satisfaction or other ways of verifying that there are customers who will buy a particular product or service that represents the innovation we're talking about. And then we'll get into the economics. Is this a viable, sustainable enterprise? Is it something that might break even but not have enough profits to grow? Is it something that requires charitable contributions in order to achieve the desired outcome? So we'll work through those in 2 weeks with marketing outcomes next week. And today, the question is, I've got a new innovation. I've got something that I want to take to market. And in order to get the funding source to write the check, what information do you have that proves this? Can you communicate this information clearly and precisely to the person? They don't want to see a 40-page engineering report that says, hey, I took frac water and created clean water. They're going to want a one-pager that says, I took water that had these specifications, qualifications, these contaminants, and I put it through this device, which we created, and I got this water, and this water is clean according to this standard, and the testing was completed by this organization. They don't need reams and reams of information, or I guess gigabytes of information on how this was all accomplished. They want input, output with the magic in the middle, and they want it in short, concise statements that they can understand. And if you say clean water, that's not specific enough. If you say I met an ASTM standard, that's too technical without explaining that this is a standard commonly used by local municipal water districts to meet EPA requirements to make the water saleable to a community. So there will still be the challenge of how you communicate the information about the technology with a principal focus on the outcome, the benefits that are received by using whatever the innovation or technology is going to be. And again, this may require communications back and forth with the funding source, because they may not have zeroed in on what they want. They may not have set their own standard, and that needs to be determined up front in the very first communication engagement with the funding source. You say, hey, we're doing some stuff with water purification, and they go, yeah, I'm interested. You go, what application are you interested in? What standard of cleanliness do you need to achieve? What source of information would be acceptable to you as a third-party verification in order to get you to write a check? And these are things that cannot be put off until later on, because there's no point in developing a relationship with somebody who's never going to write a check. The primary benefit of my motivated money process to raising funding is to find people who are most motivated, because they are the first ones who are most likely to write a check. And if you can get funding from them, then you don't have to talk to everybody else. If you believe in the common practice of knocking on every door, exhausting every possible funding source, you're engaging in an activity for which you do not have the time or money. And you are demonstrating to a lot of investors that you don't really understand marketing. You don't really understand your business. You're not necessarily competent to run a business because of the fact that you are not engaging in simple marketing practices of trying to find the best, first, most interested, most motivated investor and focusing everything on them to get the funding you need to move your project forward. So with that, this is the Successful Funding Show. If you would like more information, you can reach me at this email address. I do offer 15 minutes of free consultation to people who have got stuck in their funding project and would like my quick insight as to what may or may not be done to move a funding project forward. I do have a newsletter, which is available on LinkedIn. And next week, we will have another funding show where we're going to talk about successful funding achieved by fact-checking. And we're going to drill down deep on market assessment and analysis to verify that someone will actually buy the product at a price greater than what we want to cost for it, which will allow us to then get in 2 weeks to the economics of a sustainable business, the ability to project forward an outcome that will return the investment to the investor with some ROI and possibly with some impact, which will meet their investment criteria. And most importantly, will allow them to choose you over everybody else who's out there looking for money from the same source. So thank you for everyone who is with me today in the audience. Thank you to everyone. And I see Harvey Tuck is showing up here, reaching out to Harvey Tuck in the UK, who works with franchisees and franchisors as another way of starting a business without necessarily starting from scratch, by pairing with someone who's already created a franchise business model. Harvey, thanks for being with us this morning. Look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you to everyone, and we'll see you next week.